The long road through the Black Forest. I deliver old things for a living armoires, radios, a grandfather clock that still smelled like pipe smoke. Most days, I drive a white box truck with a rattling door that only opens if you swear at it. But for the longer trips, I take my own car, a sensible sedan with scuffed upholstery and a dashboard light that flickers when I hit a pothole. That's what I was driving the night I took the B500 south through the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest of Germany, dense and tall and old enough to have its own gravity. I had picked up a lacquered jewelry box from a woman in Baden-Baden who said it had belonged to her grandmother. It was heavy for its size, with a hidden drawer you could only open if you pressed just right on a carved spruce branch. She wrapped it in an old scarf with initials embroidered at the corner and handed it to me like a gift and a burden. "Be careful," she said in English. "It has memories." I smiled politely because people say things like that about old objects. Then I put it on the passenger seat and buckled it in as a joke. The road ran like a seam through the trees. My headlights made tunnels. Fog sank low, pooling in the valleys like milk. The GPS said I had 2 hours before I reached my motel near Titisee. I turned off the radio to hear the engines even hum, and the soft thump of something in the trunk sliding when I took a curve. Moving blankets, a coil of rope, a box of straps. The jewelry box up front beside me rode steady, quiet as a closed mouth. The first turnoff I missed because the sign was old and half covered in moss. The second one I took because I didn't want to have to do a U-turn on the narrow road with a freight truck bearing down on me. The side road was narrower, the trees closer, the fog suddenly thicker, as if the car had dropped into a deeper part of the night. The GPS recalculated, thought about it, and offered me a new route with the same calm female voice. "In 700 meters, turn right." I drove 700 meters. There was no right turn. There was only a curve that wound up into higher, darker trees. The GPS recalculated again, a little too quickly this time, like it had been expecting this. "In 200 meters, turn left." I drove 200 meters. No left. Just more black spruce, hemlock, the occasional ghost shape of a logging road closed off with a chain. I laughed once, short and not amused. "Okay," I said out loud. To the car, to the box, to the trees, I don't know. "Okay." The fog deepened. I slowed. The headlights reached only 10 meters ahead. The edges of their light looked torn. The road tilted a little. The GPS said, "In 100 meters, make a U-turn." When it spoke the last word, the radio hissed just for a second, like someone had breathed very close to the microphone. I turned the radio off, though I hadn't turned it on. The next sign I saw was a triangle with a deer painted on it, warning of wild animals. It looked new, reflective, clean. I relaxed a fraction. I took the next curve slower. The jewelry box's buckle clicked softly as it shifted against the seat. I glanced at it, and had the sudden, unreasonable sense that it had moved closer to the edge, like a child sliding nearer to a window to watch the night. I told myself I was tired. The road came up on a lay-by, a little gravel pull-off with a view that would have been beautiful in daylight. In the fog, it was just a darker shape. A man stood there at the edge of the gravel, facing the trees. He wore a dark coat and no hat. His hair was too long and looked wet. I would not have noticed him if he had not lifted his hand the way people do when they're about to wave, and then don't. It was a small, uncertain motion, as if he wasn't sure he was real enough to be seen. I drove past him. I told myself I had imagined him, because people aren't out there at midnight, in fog with no car and no hat. Then the jewelry box ticked. The sound was so crisp, I thought something in the dashboard had popped. I looked at the box. The lid had shifted a hair, though I had taped it. A smell rose up from it, faint and sweet and wrong like flowers that had been pressed in a book for too long and had turned from purple to brown. I pulled into the next lay-by on a strip of gravel barely wider than the car and put the hazard lights on. The fog made the flashers look like the heart of a cigarette in the dark. I unbuckled the jewelry box and lifted it onto my lap. The lacquer felt warmer than it should have. I pressed the lid down. It settled back with another neat tick, and for a moment I felt like I had set a clock by hand. I told myself to keep driving. I pulled back onto the road, followed the white line on the edge like a tightrope. I passed a tree with a ribbon tied around its trunk, bright blue. 2 curves later, I passed a tree with a ribbon tied around its trunk, bright blue. It was the same ribbon. I was sure of it, because it was frayed on one side like someone had cut it with a pocket knife, and it curled a little at the end. I watched it pass into the rear view and felt the old childish fear rise up from the pit of my stomach. The fear of walking in place and getting nowhere while your legs work, and the room breathes around you. In 200 meters, turn left, the GPS said again, polite, inexorable. I turned it off, thumb pressed down on the power button until the screen went black. The car was suddenly very quiet. The fog pressed against the windows like foam. I saw the man again. He stood in a different lay-by, or maybe the same one, I couldn't tell. He faced the trees still. He raised his hand again, that half wave. I couldn't tell if he was asking for help or telling me not to stop. I didn't stop. The jewelry box ticked again. Then, softly, like someone clearing their throat, it made a sound from inside. Not a rattle. Not the slide of the hidden drawer. A small, dry sound like a voice trying to learn how to exist after a lot of silence. I pulled over without deciding to. I turned the key and the engine died. The flashers clicked. The fog didn't care. I opened the box. I know how that sounds. But the thing is, when something ticks like a clock, and you are alone, you want to know what time it is. Inside, the box was lined in faded red velvet with indentations where rings had sat for years. The hidden drawer had 2 compartments, both empty. No ticking now, no smell, no voice. Just velvet and the impression of a life. I touched the lining and felt a grit under my fingertip. I rubbed, and a tiny flake of something came away, brown and papery. I thought petals, and then I thought no. In the side mirror, in the stuttering hazard light, I saw the man in the coat. He stood behind my car now, a step into the road. He had not walked up. I would have heard gravel. He was just there. He lifted his hand again, and I understood finally that he wanted me to roll down the window. I did, because I am an idiot. Because the night makes you polite. Because the jewelry box had been given to me with a warning in a soft voice, and I had said, "Thank you," like a boy. The window slid down and the cold came in, and with it, a smell of wet earth and pine sap, and something like singed hair. The man leaned forward, but did not bend enough to show his face. He said in German, "Do not get out." I am not a fluent German speaker. I've learned enough to order a beer and apologize for being American. But I understood him. The words were very clear. "Okay," I said. "Okay." He nodded once, then lifted his hand and pointed at the jewelry box on my lap. He said another sentence I didn't catch, full of words I didn't know. I shook my head. "Ich sorry, I don't understand." He paused, then said in halting English, "It belongs here." "It belongs to a family in Freiburg," I said. "I'm taking it to them." He shook his head. The movement looked wrong, like it started too late and went on too long. "It belongs here," he said again, and his breath fogged the air between us and did not drift away in the hazard light wind. I said, "I have to go." He straightened and stepped back into the fog like a person stepping behind a curtain. He raised his hand again, and this time it was definitely a wave. I put the car in gear and drove. The jewelry box ticked again, once, like a warning. I said to no one, "If this is a joke, I'm not laughing." The next 10 minutes are hard to tell because time felt like it had been folded differently. I drove, and the same 3 trees went by again and again. One of them had a scar where lightning had run down. Another had a carved heart low to the ground with 2 initials I couldn't read. The third had the blue ribbon. I began to think I had somehow missed the same curve so many times that I had worn a groove in the night. Then the headlights picked up something on the asphalt, dark streaks that started thin and widened. At first, I thought oil. Then, I thought water. Then, I understood how wet blood looks under light. It wasn't fresh. It had that slick, done look. It led off the road into the trees. I slowed to a stop because if you've ever seen blood where there shouldn't be any, you stop, even if you shouldn't. I put the hazards on again, like a fool erecting a polite beacon. I didn't get out because the man had told me not to. I put the window down a crack and listened. There was a sound I couldn't place. Not an animal. Not the wind. It was like listening to a song on a radio that was half-tuned, a melody under static. The jewelry box made the small, dry sound again. A whisper like paper rubbed on paper. I opened it again without meaning to. I could have sworn the velvet lining had a different shape now, like something heavy had sat there a moment and then left. I put my fingertip to the indentation and it was warm. I closed the lid. The radio came on by itself. A voice spoke in German, calm and steady, the way they do on traffic updates. I caught words I knew. Unfall accident. Spare enclosure. Kilometer. Then a number. Then the name of a road I thought I recognized. The voice faded and another voice replaced it. A woman singing something soft with a chorus that sounded like a lullaby. I turned the radio off at the knob. It stayed on a second longer and then obeyed me. The blood streaks darkened and then lightened and then were gone, like breath on glass. The fog moved. A shape stepped out of it, and for a moment I thought it was the man again. But it wasn't. It was a woman in a dress not warm enough for the night, hair wet, her face pale. She stood at the edge of the road and lifted her hand, the same way he had, the same little half-wave. I locked the doors. It was an instinct that made me feel 5 years old. She stepped closer. Her face didn't sharpen as she moved the way faces do in light. It stayed a little blurred, like a photograph someone had tried to clean with a thumb. She said something in German I couldn't catch. Then she tried again in English. "We are lost." I said, "I'm sorry, because I am an idiot, and because the night makes you polite." I shook my head. Her mouth made a shape like a smile, and like a shiver at once. She pointed at the jewelry box. "Home," she said. I realized I was shaking. I put my hands firmly on the steering wheel so I wouldn't drop them in my lap like a puppet. "This belongs to a family in Freiburg," I said again, like a spell. It felt like the wrong thing to say, and also like the only thing I had. She lowered her hand. She looked down, and for the first time her face sharpened in a small way, because I saw the scar on her forehead, old and shiny, as if time had tried to heal something the body had not been able to fully remember. She reached her hand toward the jewelry box slowly. I slapped the lid closed like a child guarding candy. She withdrew. She nodded once. Then she stepped back into the fog and was gone. The GPS turned itself back on. The screen lit the car's interior, a sickly blue. The music from the radio pressed against the inside of the windshield and made the fog look like it was breathing. The jewelry box ticked again, and then was very still. I drove. I picked a speed, just slow enough to feel like I could stop if someone stepped out, just fast enough to feel like I was getting away. Though, from what I couldn't have told you, the trees went on. The fog went on. The road agreed to exist in front of me as long as I watched it. After a while, the GPS offered a left turn that was actually there. I took it, breathless with relief, like someone who has been promised that if they count to 10 and open their eyes, the bad thing will be gone. The road widened. The fog thinned. I passed a sign that said Tennessee in white letters with an arrow. I laughed out loud and felt a little unhinged. At the motel, I checked in and asked, trying to sound casual, if the B500 ever got fog like that. The man behind the desk, who had a face like a friendly owl, said, "Sometimes the forest is old. It keeps." He slid a key toward me on a heavy ring. "You look cold." "I'm fine," I said. I was not fine. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the key twice. In the room, I put the jewelry box on the table and stared at it. The smell it had made in the car had gone, or I had gotten used to it. I touched the hidden drawer, and it slid open smoothly. In the back corner, caught under the velvet, something glinted. I dug with my fingernail and pulled out a pin I hadn't seen before. A straight pin, long, with a pearl bead at the top. It had a tiny smear of dark something on it that I didn't think was rust. I closed the drawer. I went to bed with the TV on a low volume. I dreamed about trees stepping closer to a window and about a man and a woman lifting their hands as if they were practicing being human. In the morning, the world had edges again. Birds made cheerful sounds that felt obscene. I took the jewelry box to the address in Freiburg. A woman my age opened the door. She had a face I would have recognized from the lacquered lid if the lid had had a face. Cheekbones, a precise mouth, eyes that seemed to look past you. She saw the box and put her hand to her throat. "You found it," she said. "I thought it was lost." "It wasn't lost," I said. "It was waiting." She laughed. "My grandmother said it always wanted to come home." I stood on the doorstep, holding the weight of the thing, and said carefully, "Because you can sometimes tell when a person will tell you the truth if you ask gently, 'What happened on the road?'" Her smile faded. She looked past me at the street like the answer was walking there. "My grandfather died," she said, "on a curve, in fog, before I was born." She paused. "And then, 10 years later, my grandmother, same place." She looked back at me. She used to say the road forgot to let her go. I put the box in her hands. "Maybe it finally remembered," I said, "because sometimes the wrong words are the only ones you can use." She nodded as if that answer made a kind of sense. On the drive back north, I stayed on the main roads. The fog was normal fog, the kind that lifts and shows you cows in a field as if it has performed a trick. The GPS worked like a polite friend. I slept the next night with the hotel window open a crack and dreamed nothing I could remember. Weeks later, back in my apartment, jet-lagged and glad to be home, I got a postcard with a picture of the Black Forest on it in summer. Green, lush, unthreatening. On the back, in careful handwriting, it said, "The box is safe. Thank you. When you drive at night, do not stop for waves." It was signed with the woman's name and then, in a different hand, in shaky old script. "It belongs here." The next time I took a late delivery, I put a small bell on the dashboard. I don't know why. It makes a pretty sound when the car takes a curve and the air moves through the windows. It keeps me honest. It reminds me that roads are agreements between us and the dark. The last time I drove through fog, I did not turn when the GPS told me to, unless I could see the road. And once, at midnight, on a stretch of highway in another country entirely, I saw a figure by the side of the road lift a hand, just that small, uncertain half-wave, and I kept my speed and my eyes forward, and the bell rang once, softly, like a coin dropping in a bowl. Sometimes when I'm tired, when the lights blur and the miles go slick, I think I hear a small tick from the glove compartment, the sound of something with good manners clearing its throat. I don't keep anything in there that could make that sound. I hear it anyway, and I say out loud, like a man telling a story to himself to keep the night from uncovering him. Not tonight, not this road. And I drive on, and the trees stand very still, listening, and let me pass. The last shift on the Firth. It's not the height that bothers you on the Forth Bridge. It's the hollowness under your boots. If you've never done maintenance at night on a cantilever, you won't know that feeling. Steel singing in the wind like a saw blade. The rails humming with a train you can hear minutes before you see. The black water below holding no reflection, just a wide, dark mouth. You learn to trust the harness, the rivets, the way your hands remember ladders in the dark. You don't think about the space underneath you, because if you let your brain hold it all at once, the stars that look close enough to shake from their sockets, the tide sliding in like a hand, you'll lock up, and the fear will set like plaster. I was on nights that winter, paired with a newer lad named Connor, who wanted to prove he wasn't green. The Rhoda had us checking expansion joints on the north approach, where the wind tears along the estuary and makes your teeth sing if you let your jaw hang. It had snowed in town, but up on the bridge the snow didn't dare stay. It blew sideways and became something else. Grit, needles, breath. We clocked in at 22, signed out our radios, and the little battered thermos of tea kept behind the desk like a holy thing, and clipped into the harness lines on the access platform. The supervisor, a man called McCready, who could make a safety briefing sound like poetry, ran through the list. Bolts, cracks, rail temperature, scarf up loose scarves, keep your goddamn lanyards tidy, and if you hear the horn, hug steel. Ferry bridge tonight, he added, as we stepped onto the walkway. Connor raised an eyebrow. Ferry? McCready's mouth made a shape that might have been a smile. Locals used to leave bits of ribbon on the girders, he said, calling it good luck. Rubbish, of course. But mind your footing there. She'll lift you up if you let her. He said it the way guys on boats say, don't whistle or you'll call wind. Half joking, half a thing they refused to test. We clipped on and went out. The night had the clean, hard edge only Scottish winter manages. Beneath, the Firth of Forth stretched black and flat, as if ironed. A train rattled out of the distance and into the throat of the bridge. The whole structure thrummed lightly, a cat purring under our boots. The locomotive passed us, its windows showing small dioramas of faces caught in their private midnights. The tail lights dwindled. The purr settled. Feels like standing on the ribcage of a sleeping giant, Connor said. Keep your clip short, I said. She'll sing you off if you get daydreaming. We worked in a practiced rhythm. He handed me tools. I checked bolts. We logged readings on a clipboard that had lived more weather than most people. Wind pushed through lattice and truss with a sound like the sea forced through teeth. After an hour, I'd stopped hearing it as anything but time passing. We reached the span the old hands called the ferry. It's not different in daylight except for a run of rivets that look like a necklace. But at night, it feels held. The wind dips its shoulder here. The darkness has a weight. I felt it in my chest, the way you feel an approaching storm. Tea, I said. We wedged ourselves into the lee of a diagonal and passed the thermos back and forth, both of us pretending we weren't grateful for the heat. Steam braided off the cup and was sewn into the wind before it got a chance to rise. Connor, busy, not shivering, stared out toward Queensferry. You ever hear the stories? He asked. Which ones? I said. The painter that fell and kept painting? The riveter who hammered his own shadow into the steel? The crew that walked out at night and never came back, he said, and took a gulp like he wanted to wash the words down. Plenty of crews never came back, I said. Tides like this don't bother with sentimentality. No, I mean the ones that aren't ours. The old crew in the wrong gear. People say they see lamps moving where there's no one scheduled. Hear chain, but there's no chain hung. People say lots of things. He shrugged, pleased to have gotten the tale into the air. Macready calls this span the ferry because of that. Aye, like the old folk tales. Light that's not light, men that are not men. Macready calls it the ferry because he's been on this bridge 40 years and likes to needle, I said, but my mouth was dry and the tea didn't fix it. My gran used to stick a ribbon into the fence at South Queens Ferry when we drove by, muttering something half in Gaelic, half in habit. I'd unpicked one once, on a dare. Nothing happened. The wind just looked at me differently for a day. We finished the tea. The cold climbed us like ivy. We clipped and moved. At 2:13, just as I was noting the temperature drop on the rail, the radio hissed. It's not unusual. The signal has to thread all that steel. But this hiss was wet. It sounded like breathing through teeth that weren't in the mouth quite right. I thumbed the button. North 7 to base. Base! Came Macready's velvet growl, sweetened by static. All well? Radio breathed weird just then, I said. You got a train coming through? Green till 0240, he said. No movement scheduled. The Tay snapped a signal last week. Mind your eyes on those arms. Copy, I said. We were both quiet a second too long. The radio, dead in my hand, gave a little click like a tongue. Then another voice came through. Not Macready, not any voice I knew, but familiar in the way your own name yelled from far away is familiar even before you understand it. Lift on 3, it said, clipped, nasal, not a modern Scottish accent. Mind the sling. Then nothing. Then that wet hiss, and under it, faint metal on metal. Chain. I heard that, Connor said too quickly, proving he was brave enough to say he was scared. Old signals, I lied. Atmospherics bouncing off the 4th. Atmospherics, aye, he said. And when I reached for the next bolt, I noticed his hand shook just a hair. We worked. The air worked back, thick as if it had mass. Below us, the water flowed the way time does. Forward, obviously, even when you could swear you were standing still. Somewhere out toward the island, a herring gull screamed like a child and shut up at once, as if it had been hushed. At 0231, we saw the lights. They came from the east, a string of small glowworm bulbs moving along a lower truss line where no one had any business being. Maybe a train inspection crew, I thought first, even as the part of my brain that knows the rota shook its head. The lights weren't the cold LEDs we use now. They were warmer, fuzzier, the way gaslight looks in old photos, hovering halos that didn't so much illuminate as suggest. Who's on lower? I said into the radio. You got a lot open we weren't told about. Silence. Then the radio produced a word that sounded like I, but spoken from the bottom of a deep room. Then dead again. The lights moved with dreadful purpose, each one at the same height, the distance between them regular like careful handwriting. As they got nearer, you could see the shapes around them, not hard outlines, but denser dark within dark. Men with lamps on their caps. The way we used to do it. They walked with the sure-footed gait of men who'd spent years learning the hum of steel. Stay clipped, I said, as if there was any chance in any world I'd unclip at that moment. Do we call it in? Connor whispered, as if the lights would hear and take offense. We keep working, I said, because the alternative was, what, wave? The line of lamps passed under our span. No footsteps sounded. The wind carried their halos into threads. I smelled something old and complicated paint. Coal, a kind of warm iron that doesn't exist anymore. One of the lamps paused directly below us. Whoever wore it lifted his face. I didn't see a face. I saw a degree of darkness that meant a face was there. I saw the lamp tilt and steady. I felt my name form in my throat and stay there, obedient. The lamp nodded once, clipped to the brim of a cap no one wears, and moved on. The string of lights passed into the west and, all at once, were gone, as if the bridge had swallowed them. "Atmospherics," Connor said in a voice that had run out of places to go. "Grand ones." We stood quiet long enough for the stars to move a fraction. The radio, sullen as a cat, clicked once and slept. I handed him the spanner. The metal felt warmer than it should have. At 02:47, a horn blew 3 short notes from the south. We both jerked. Horn means train on, hug steel. We pressed in, clipped twice, faces to lattice, breath fogging our eyelashes. No lights came. The horn didn't sound again. The track stayed empty. The hum that rolls ahead of a locomotive never arrived. "Horn test," I said into my coat. "Horn test," said no one. We unstuck ourselves from the steel and finished the checklist with the care you take when the ordinary has become a thing you are grateful for. We turned toward the shore at last, steel singing under our boots. The ferry span let us go as if we had paid a toll. When we reached the access platform, we unclipped with the special clumsy tenderness you save for the end of a shift. Tired but unwilling to betray you are tired. In the hut, the heater rattled. The kettle breathed. McCready sat behind the desk with his reading glasses on his nose, making notes with the seriousness of a surgeon. "Any joy?" he asked without looking up. "Bolt's tight," I said. "She's got a rumor in her radio mind." He looked at the set. "If you want new gear, you'd better marry a banker." He finally raised his head. "You look like men who've seen church." "Do you ever?" Connor started. "The lamps." McCready's mouth flattened. He took off his glasses, folded them on the ledger, and said, "Ah." "Ah," Connor repeated, half angry. "That's the briefing?" "What do you want, boy?" McCready said, and a line of gentleness ran under the gruff. "A story that ends with a lesson? Here it is. Clip twice, mind your toes, keep your wits. The rest is the fourth's business." "You've seen them," I said. He shrugged. "Sometimes a thing remembers the way it used to be. Sometimes the way it used to be remembers us back." "Were there losses?" I asked. "I know the numbers. Everyone who works the bridge knows the names carved in brass. But I meant here, tonight, this very span. There were always losses," he said. "You don't build something this honest without a price. Doesn't mean the price is due every time you hear chain in the wind." He poured tea, put the cup near my hand. "Drink that. You're still out there somewhere yet." On my last night that winter, we were sent to the center span, the heart of the cantilever. The air was colder higher, lonelier. The water didn't look like water. It looked like a hole punched in the world. The sky wasn't black, but that deep navy that holds all the black in it, like a promise. It was just me. Connor was off on some training. I was grateful for his absence and embarrassed by the gratitude. Halfway through the checklist, the radio clicked twice. Not hissing, not voices, like a code. I thumbed the button. Bass? Silence. I kept working. The work keeps you sane. It makes the world small enough to hold in your hands. This bolt, this reading, this angle of steel in your palm. I wrote down a temperature. The pen made a scratching that sounded like a small animal trying to get out of a cardboard box. I capped the pen and breathed and told myself to stop it. And then I felt it. Not heard felt. A tremor under my boots that isn't wind, isn't train, isn't tide. A human tremor, the rhythm of men carrying weight. The lamps were back. I didn't have to look to know. I looked anyway. They moved along a cord, low and sure, closer than the other night. I saw one man more shape than man bend his head and speak to another. His hand came up and rested on the steel. My hand mirrored it without my say-so, palm to cold lattice. Across the 60 feet of air and a century, our hands lay on the same rib of the same animal. "All right, lads," a voice said, clear as a bell struck underwater. "On 3. I felt the pull through the steel. Felt it answer, the honest give of a structure doing what she was made to do. Carry, hold, endure. The lamps flared as if shouldering strain. One of them nearer, too near flickered. In the flicker, I saw, for a blink, a face. Not a ghostly blur, but a human face like any you'd see at the pub. Sharp nose, chapped mouth, a smear of paint across one cheek, eyes pinched against wind. He saw me. I'm as sure of that as I am of anything I will ever be sure of. His mouth made a quick, practical shape I knew from endless nights on the girders. Mind your line. I looked down. My lanyard had twisted on itself. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how. A stupid thing. The sort of stupid thing that makes widows. I untwisted it with fingers that had become some other man's, slow and careful, the way you untie a knot on a living animal. When I looked up, the lamps had moved on. One by one, they slipped into the higher dark. The last paused, tipped, and went out. I stood a while, listening to the honest hum of a structure in winter. Then I finished the work, because that is what you do. Back at the hut, McCready was half asleep over the ledger. He woke like a guard dog, slow eyelids, quick eyes, and grunted. "Cold." "Freezing," I said. He poured tea. I took it. We sat in the small, bright, human box of the hut, while the big, dark, inhuman box of the bridge towered around us. And for a little while the two things were not at war. I didn't tell him about the hand on the steel. I didn't tell him about the mouth making a silent warning. I didn't say thank you out loud to men who were either never there or were there so hard they abraded time. I let the tea warm my mouth. I let my hands stop shaking. It's years later now. I'm on days. I train the new ones. I tell them the same things McCready told me. Clip twice, mind your toes, keep your wits. I tell them fear is a tool if you make it one. I don't tell them about the lamps unless they ask. And even then, only enough so they won't piss themselves if the radio breathes wrong. Sometimes, in town, when the light is right, I see a scrap of ribbon on a fence, and I am 15 again, trying to pull luck out of the wind like a thorn. On clear winter nights, my wife says the bridge looks like lace. I say it looks like bone. She laughs and puts her hand in the crook of my arm in a way that makes the world small enough to hold again. When trains go over at 02 Zao, and I am home in bed, I feel the house purr, and I think of hands on steel. I keep a length of old lanyard hung by the back door like a superstition I would deny if asked. And sometimes, when the sea fog creeps low across the Forth and the bridge disappears into it like a remembered song, I go quiet and listen. If you've worked her long enough, you can hear it. A clang, a call, a laugh that sounds like any man laughing at a small joke told to keep hunger off. And under it, the long, low note of a structure doing exactly what it was built to do, carrying the weight of the living and the dead with the same tired, endless grace. I never untie my line without looking twice. I never step onto the ferry with a loose thought in my head. And I never, ever say goodnight, out loud to the dark. I nod to it, as to a neighbor with whom I share a fence and a story, and it nods back, and we leave one another to our work.
The salt door at St. Malo. The first time I smelled the salt door, I thought someone had spilled pickling brine in the stairwell. It was that sharp. Vinegar, salt, the ghost of something once living. Our building in San Malo is old enough to have settled into the rocket creaks, the way old boats creak, as if dreaming of tides. My landlord called it romance when I signed the lease, and I agreed because I was 27 and tired, and the light in the kitchen fell across the table like a blessing. If you leave the shutters open, the morning comes at you like a soft animal, paws on your chest, breath on your face. If you close them, the dark is velvet and smells like the harbor. I took the flat after a breakup that made Paris feel like a cupboard I couldn't breathe in. I told friends I wanted air and space, and Saint Malo answered in its blunt way. Wind with teeth, gulls that swear at you, salt that crystallizes on window latches if you don't wipe it off. I started working at a bookstore 2 streets from the ramparts, a place where the owner, a woman with a jaw like a figurehead, kept lists in a ledger that smelled like linseed oil. I learned to make coffee that didn't taste like punishment. I learned the tides. The salt door is on the 2nd floor landing between my flat and the neighbor's a padlocked short door, set into the wall at shin height, as if made for a child. It has no handle, only a ring. When you touch it, your fingers come away gritty. The landlord, when I asked, said, "It's nothing, old salt storage. The Masons left it when they knocked through in the 60s. Don't fuss with it." I didn't at first. I fussed with other things. Getting my boxes unpacked, finding a chair that didn't wobble, learning the exact angle to wedge my window open so the wind wouldn't slam it shut at 4 in the morning. The building made itself known to me the way buildings do, by revealing its small habits. A pipe that sighs like a flautist in the walls. A board that betrays you when you sneak for water at night. The first night I heard it was a spring tide. The city had that braced feeling it gets when the ocean decides to lean in. Sandbags stacked, cars moved, shutters latched. I watched from the ramparts at dusk with everyone else, breathing wool and salt, as the water stamped closer and closer to the stones. When I went up to my flat, the stairwell smelled of brine, and the salt door had sweated a little white onto the tile. At 2 in the morning, something knocked from inside the door. Not a random settling. A knock the way a neighbor knocks, polite twice, assertive the 3rd time. I sat up in bed. The sound didn't come again. The dark of the flat held steady. The shutters ticked in a draft. The sea sounded huge and present, like someone had put their mouth to the window glass and was breathing deliberately. I got up, padded barefoot to the hall, and stood looking at the door. It looked back the way doors do, flat, blank, dumb. I leaned down and put my palm to it, cold, damp. The salt filmed my skin and dried almost at once, tightening. "Hello," I said, because we are all stupid at 2 in the morning. The stone did not answer. The smell of vinegar was stronger. I went back to bed and pretended I didn't listen. At work the next day, I told myself it had been the building adjusting to the pressure drop. The owner snorted. "The stairwell knocks every big tide," she said. "Old stones remembering old water. You'll get used to it." "Does anyone else?" I started, then chickened out. "Is there a superstition I should know?" She laughed. "In San Malo there are 100. Choose the one that makes you feel brave." That evening, the odor was worse. When I put my face near the salt door, my eyes watered. I bent to look at the padlock. It was old iron, the kind they sell replicas of in tourist shops. But this one had the honest rust of a life lived. The keyhole was crusted with salt. Something inside shifted when I touched the ring, the way a pile of shells settles when you set a foot near it on the beach. That night, the knocking came again. 3 times. I got out of bed, angry at the door, at the sea, at the ridiculousness of being afraid of a cupboard. I fetched a butter knife from the kitchen and levered gently at the padlock, expecting nothing. The lock surrendered as if it had been waiting to. The shackle lifted with a tacky little sound, salt sticking and letting go. I paused, knife in hand, and heard the sea change tone the way a crowd does when the person you've all been waiting for steps onto the stage. The building breathed. From behind the door, there came a sound that wasn't a knock now, but a rub, as if someone were drying their hands on the other side of the wood. "I'm going to open it," I said out loud, and my voice sounded like I was trying to convince myself I was brave. "If you're a rat, I will murder you." I pulled the ring. The door stuck to the jamb with a sound like lips coming apart. The smell that came out was not vinegar now, but deep ocean. Kelp, rot, the heavy iron smell of blood diluted to clean. The space behind wasn't a cupboard. It was a tunnel the size of a child laid sideways, lined in stone-furred white with salt. It ran left and right, following the spine of the stairwell, and then downward, curving toward the foundations like a throat. I should have closed it then. I should have put the lock back on and hung a saint's medal over the ring and called the landlord and said, "There is a hole in your building and something has put its mouth to it." Instead, I reached in and touched the salt. It crumbled under my fingers like old snow. It tasted, when I licked it without thinking, of time, of storms stored and returned. "Bonjour," I said to the throat of the house. It said nothing back. It breathed, though. Not air, not the shift of weather. A cadence, in and out. The rhythm of a person who is very tired and trying not to be. For a week, I left the door unlocked. I don't know why. I told myself I wanted the salt to dry, the smell to vent. At night, I heard things move in the tunnel. Not animals, not water. The soft, small sounds of people trying to be considerate in a space too close for their bodies. Once, at 3, a voice spoke in a language that was not French, not English, something older, a word that snapped like a flag. On the 8th day, a coin appeared on the floor by the door. It wasn't there at midnight when I went to bed. It was there at 6 when I went to make coffee. A little disc of dark metal with a hole punched through near the edge. The face wasn't Napoleon or Marianne or any of the faces I know. I rinsed it under the tap and the water ran brown. When it dried, salt bloomed on it like frost. I took it to the bookstore. The owner turned it over in her broad fingers and shook her head. "Not mine," she said. "Maybe a fisherman's charm or a washerwoman's. People used to sew coins into hems against drowning." "You're making that up." "I am," she said cheerfully, "but it could be true." I put the coin on my windowsill, and the same night a second appeared by the salt door, smaller, square, with a scallop incised. I didn't put that one on the sill. I put it back on the floor by the door like a person making change. The next tide was higher. The city braced harder. The salt door sweated. I stood on the ramparts and watched waves hit the stones hard enough to ring. I felt each impact in my bones. Below me, a man waded into the boiling edge to retrieve a kid's dropped bucket and came back with it held up like a trophy. The crowd cheered. The sky closed to pewter. When I turned toward home, the gulls were silent, every single one of them standing with their faces into the wind as if listening to instructions. At 1 a.m, something knocked, and I said, without moving, "I hear you." The knocking stopped as if I had slapped a polite hand. I lay in bed and counted. At 60, I got up. The hall was cold. The salt door had bled a line of wet down the tile. I opened it, and the smell hit me so hard I had to brace a hand on the jamb. Deep water, low tide, old smoke, iron. I put my face near the opening. The tunnel breathed me in. "Do you need help?" I said, and immediately hated the thinness of the word. From the left toward the neighbor's wall, something slid. Not a body, not even matter maybe. Attention. It came to the door and rested there like a head. Then, very gently, it exhaled. The breath was cold as new snow and salt stung my eyes. Under the salt, a note. Cabbage soup, wool, tar, people smell. I fetched my father's headlamp from the drawer, where everything important eventually ends up, and strapped it on. I took a dish towel, because you always take a towel when you're going to be an idiot. I took my phone. I texted the owner, "I am about to do something stupid with a door. If I don't come in at 10, check on me." Then I knelt, went flat on my stomach like a child playing hide and seek, and slid into the house's throat. The salt cut my elbows. The stone scraped the bones of my hips. The tunnel narrowed and widened like a throat swallowing. The headlamp picked out crystals like stars, and then like teeth, and then like nothing but salt. I went left first, toward the neighbors, because that is where the attention seemed to lean. After 3 meters, the tunnel curved down, and then sharply widened into a pocket where a person could sit with their knees to their chin. There was a mark on the stone at the height of a shoulder, a long dark smear that could have been soot or could have been skin and salt arguing. I put my palm to it. The cold climbed my arm like a swift animal. When I took my hand away, the shape of my fingers stayed in salt like a negative. "Bonjour," I said again, and my headlamp flickered. When it steadied, someone had drawn a little picture in the salt opposite me while I blinked. A circle with lines for sun, a square, a stick figure with a skirt. A child's short hand. The lines blurred as I watched. The salt absorbed them the way a beach erases a name. I breathed and fought the urge to cry. The tunnel breathed and fought nothing. I backed out, panting, leaving smears like a clumsy saint. I went right. The passage sloped more steeply this way toward the foundations, toward dark. My headlamp found a broken thing like a jar. Pottery, very old, glazed that natural green the sea gives back. A length of rope mummified in salt, brittle under my fingertip. Farther on, the tunnel tightened until I had to turn my cheek to the stone to pass. My breath fogged the salt, and it dissolved, making a wet that tasted like years. Then it widened without warning into a room so low I could only hunch, but big enough for 4 adults to crouch touching knees. The floor was covered in white sand that wasn't sand but powdered salt and something else. There were prints in it. Don't picture shoe prints, picture knee prints. The worn smoothness where many bodies have leaned their backs. The marks of fingers dragged idle as if to write. the little punched circles where something like a button had been pressed again and again, leaving a pattern. I put my palm down. It matched. I held it there until it hurt. "Help?" I said again, and now my voice shook. "What do you need?" From the far wall came a sound like someone rubbing both hands over their face in fatigue. My headlamp swung and caught a shape incised shallow in the stone. 3 lines and a curve. I don't know what it meant. I knew what it meant. It meant door. Behind me, very close, something moved. It was not a person. It was not water. It was the slow shiver of pressure changing in a system that had been sealed for a long time and had been unsealed by a stupid girl with a butter knife. The air tugged my hair and then pressed it flat. The tunnel played my body like a reed. I backed out, heart in my mouth, trying not to think the word trapped, because words have teeth in places like that. At the salt door, I tumbled back into my hallway and lay looking at the ceiling while the house learned to breathe with my breathing again. The tide beyond the shutters beat time you could have set a metronome to. The smell ebbed a little. I locked the door. I put a chair against it because human. I slept and dreamed of women in skirts sitting with their knees to their chins in a white room under the ground, writing suns on the walls with their fingers. When I woke, my fingers were white to the knuckles. The owner didn't check on me. I told no one else. If you've ever held a story in your chest, you know why. Telling makes it smaller and safer, and I wasn't ready for safe. I left the lock on for a week. The knock came each night, and each night I put my palm to the door and said, "I know." The coins kept appearing, one shaped like a fish hook, one cut from bone with a hole drilled in it that the salt had made square. I lined them on the floor, a small defiant shrine. The city has plaques for history, the way some houses have wallpaper. This is where such and such sailed from. This is where so-and-so died. I walked past them with the knowledge of the door in my ribs and thought of the histories that never got plaques. Women who hid in walls, children who were told to be quiet for the length of a tide, men who pressed their hands to stone and thought door and meant salvation or meant end. St. Malo's stones tell neat stories, but they have messier ones in their mouths. On the highest tide of that month, the knocking woke me at midnight and did not stop. Not 2 polite raps, not a child's let me out. A steady, patient, exhausted knocking that had no anger in it, only endurance. I unlocked the door. The room of my hall became the room under the ground for a moment. Salt air closed my throat. My eyes watered. I put my head and shoulders in and said, "I can't pull you through. I can't. I'm not strong enough." The knocking slowed. It became taps. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I stared like an idiot. The tunnel had turned into a telegraph. I fetched my phone and, on some stupid reflex from films, Googled Morse code. The internet told me things I already half knew. I listened to the taps, heart in my throat, and matched them to letters that didn't want to be letters. H-E-L-P. "I know," I whispered. "I know." A pause, then S-O-L-E, alone. The word made a shape in my mouth that hurt. "I am here," I said, and put my hand into the tunnel up to the wrist. The cold cut and then numbed. Something moved around my fingers like water made of breath. It wasn't touching me. It was learning me. my hand came out coated in salt, as if I'd been underwater a long time and only just remembered air. I did the only sane thing I have ever done. I found the landlord at 9 in the morning with his sensible keys and his sensible complaints, and I said, "The salt door is open, and that is a problem in your building." He came, snorted at the smell, rattled the lock, and said, "We'll get a mason to seal it." "You can't," I said, and surprised myself with the force of it. "You can't bury a person a second time." He blinked. "It's a hole, mademoiselle, not a person." He locked it. I watched him. He left his ring of keys on the table without noticing, and I slipped the salt door key into my pocket like a thief. That night I opened the door again. The tunnel breathed relief and exhaustion. I said, "I can hear you. I will not let him seal you. I don't know what you need. I don't know if you're a woman in 1793, or a girl from last year, or a whole century that couldn't leave. But I won't let you be closed." I sounded ridiculous. I knew it. The tunnel didn't. The next day, a mason came with a trowel and the serious patience of men who work with things heavier than their opinions. He chipped at the frame and sucked his teeth. "Damp," he said to the landlord. "You seal this, she'll blow somewhere else." He tapped the wall. Pressure. The landlord made the face landlords make when money moves from their pocket to the world. "What do you suggest?" The mason shrugged. "A gate." He looked at me like a man looks at a person who feeds strays. Something that opens when it must, something that holds when it should. He built it in a day, an iron grill set into the frame, not pretty but honest, with a latch that would yield to a hand, not a lock that would refuse one. He scraped away the crumbling salt like snow. He let new salt bloom. He left a small, deliberate gap at the bottom, no bigger than a palm. "For air," he said, and didn't explain what air needed it. That night, the knocking was softer. I went to the grill and put my hand through the gap, and the tunnel put its breath against my fingers, present and grateful and sad. I said, "You can go when you need." I meant, I will not keep you the way the sea keeps things for my comfort. I meant, I know doors are not always for keeping out. I meant, I am trying to be a person in a city that remembers drowning. Days became weeks. The coins stopped appearing after I returned them through the gap one by one. The fish hook, the bone square, a disc polished by many thumbs. The smell ebbed to a presence you noticed only when you paid attention. On high tides, the taps came. They said nothing I could untangle and everything I understood. In winter, when the wind threw stones at the shutters and walked away whistling, I slept with my hand through the gap until my skin burned with cold, and the tunnel learned the story of my pulse. Once in summer, after tourists had gone to bed and the city belonged again to people who know which doors stick, I found a scrap of paper on my mat, damp with salt, the edges feathered. In a child's hand had been written in old, careful French the word merci. It could have been a joke. Kids do creep into buildings and steal mail and play saints. It could have been a joke for me alone, too neat, too generous. I put it on the sill where the coins had been, and the salt took it in 4 days, turning it fur and then nothing. When I go away, Paris for a week, my parents' place in Lyon, I am careful with the shutters. I tell the tunnel out loud, like a madwoman. I will be back Sunday. When I return, the grill is wet and the hall smells like a mouth that has been held closed too long. I wipe it, humming. I say bonjour to a thing that doesn't answer and answers. The owner calls me sentimental. She is right. You want an ending, all the plaques have them. This is not a plaque story. But there was one night last year, the highest tide of the decade, when the sea came up the stones like a person coming upstairs, step by step by step. The city was a rumor in spray. The gulls went inland. The wind had knives in it. At midnight, the salt door shook in its frame once, not angry. The grill sang a low, plain note. The knocking didn't come. The breath didn't come. The tunnel was empty as a lung exhaled. I sat on the floor with my hand through the gap and felt nothing but the cold of stone and the sweetness of old salt, and cried the way you cry when a thing you have loved without knowing it has gotten free. At 4, the breath returned. At 4:02, a single tap. I tapped back, the way you do when a friend gets home and texts you the agreed word. I keep the key. I keep the towel by the door. Sometimes tourists ask about the little iron gate, and I say, it's nothing, old salt storage. Sometimes I say, it's a door. The brave ones say, to where? I say, out, and watch their mouths make a shape like birds do in wind. I am not brave, not really. I am a woman who opens doors a little and holds her hand through gaps and learns to breathe with old stone. But this is what I know. Cities like Saint Malo are made of doors. Some you walk through, some you guard, some you put your hand to and whisper to, as if to a horse, until they stop shaking. We live in the rooms we are given and the ones we find. The sea comes, the sea goes, the salt flowers and recedes, and the house breathes. When you hear knocking at 2 a.m. on a spring tide, you can pretend it's the pipes. You can also get out of bed and say, I hear you, and mean it. Both are living. One is company,